Good afternoon. This is Dr. Brent Turvey. I'm here with a forensic investigator from Canada, Melanie Ingles, and we are today our third episode of The Hard Truth, the third episode. And this week we're going to be talking about hate crimes. Now, I've covered this issue in a podcast about 4 years ago, and it was not, I don't think I was really, I covered the issue. I would cover the issue, but it wasn't as good as what we're going to do today, I hope. All right. You with me there, Melanie? How you doing?
I'm here. I'm ready.
Oh, I'm missing something. Everyone can see and hear me. That's what it says. Can you hear me okay, Melanie?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you're cutting at me. That's the problem. Hold on here. Just a little bit. You're cutting out just a little bit for me.
Okay.
Hold on.
Is that on your end?
Maybe. That's entirely possible. No, I don't think so.
Seems fine on this
Let me
end.
see here. You're cutting out really bad. Let me see. No? Oh, I'm okay. Okay. All right. So let's talk just a little bit about the problems with hate crimes. Okay. And the biggest problem that we have is that most people in the criminal justice system and most victims of hate crime do not understand what they are. All right. And Melanie and I, we talked about this quite a bit over the last week, obviously. But one of the problems is that hate crimes are only easy to identify when they involve direct violence. And that's the only type of hate crime that law enforcement understands. It's the easiest form to recognize. When there's not actual physical violence, law enforcement doesn't like to get involved when it's just words or just actions that don't result in physical injury. Law enforcement's really bad about that. In fact, they'll turn away rape victims. They'll turn away victims of assault. They'll turn away people all the time because they make a calculation in their head that, oh, I can't prove this case or I don't understand this case. Therefore, I'm going to dissuade the person reporting from actually reporting. This happens quite a bit, and it's a very big problem. So that's the first thing. And I want to just get your thoughts on that, Melanie, because you actually have your own set of personal experiences about this. Obviously, you're not an expert in hate crimes. I've been working these kinds of cases for a long time, and you're just learning. So one of the things we're going to benefit from is your journey in this process. Tell us about with law enforcement in reporting hate crimes, because I know you've had a little bit, or your experience with your perspective on it.
Yeah, I have had more than one experience, unfortunately, with law enforcement that would fall under hate crime. I wasn't aware of it. Like I said, we've had a conversation recently where I was probably under the same idea of what a hate crime was, and that it had to have violence involved in it. Everything else was kind of swept under the rug. I've had experience, which we can go into detail with, reporting a sexual assault and the way that that was handled. Going forward with, I also have children that are mixed race that I've had some hate crime problems within the school that have never been reported as well.
I've lost you there. Okay. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. It creates a context where you don't feel free to make the report. That's kind of what I'm getting, right? You don't feel free or safe in even making the report, and you don't feel like you're going to get supported. Is that about right?
Because on one aspect, I was threatened not to make the report due to things that would happen to me if I reported such a thing.
Right. You're cut out. Okay. The problem is you're cutting out of my end. Let me just do one thing really quickly here, okay? Give me 1 second. At all?
You were frozen. Now you're not.
access it, I hope. What we need to understand about hate crimes is that they represent a continuum of violence. Hate crimes exist on a continuum. They don't all involve physical violence. That's the first thing. It's like anything else. Different kinds of violence exist in different degrees, but there are essentially not. This is very simplified, but there are the way to consider it is like in 4 different categories. The first one is with the spoken word, the sort of the racial or religious slurs, basically personal slurs that attack the person. Then also there are threats, direct actual threats, not physical violence, but yeah, I'm having the same problem on your end, Melanie. Don't worry. I'm having the same problem, but it'll be okay. So we have the slurs, the spoken word, in terms of calling people names or derogatory terms, epithets, words we won't use here. We all know them when we use them. And plus, people get very creative sometimes with the way that they express their anger or resentment or actual hatred of people of different nationalities, different colors, different races, different countries. But then there are threats, and these threats involve direct threats of violence or direct threats to make the person uncomfortable about what might happen if they don't comply with something. And then it gets even worse. Then we have physical assaults, attacks on property, attacks on people. And that also is on a continuum from just physical pushing to destruction of property or defacing things, but also sexual assault is another part of that physical attack. And then finally, murder. Murder is the most extreme form of hate crime. And essentially, it's about power. It's about a power dynamic. It's about asymmetry. The person who's making the attack, who's engaging in the crime, is doing so from a position of asymmetrical power in society, in culture. And this is one of the things that I realized not too long ago, working my cases and constructing these sort of ideas of crime and explaining them to the court. Ultimately, it's about controlling space. It's about controlling someone's physical space and controlling their ability to move around in it. Essentially threatening them or punishing them for being in a space and making them feel like they don't belong there, either a public space or a private space even. And this is the problem. It's a desire to control the person, a desire to keep them from feeling like they matter, like they have any sort of agency, and like they belong, to make them feel like they need to leave. And in fact, this is manifested in the actual statement of people that a person should go back to their country or should leave this country or leave this space. You again and again saying things, you don't belong here. You don't belong here is a constant refrain. Abian says, different ideologies such as political affiliation, not at all. Abian, that is completely untrue. That's a great question. I love your question because political party and affiliation has nothing to do with it. This is a really important concept to understand. We talked about this asymmetry. There has to be asymmetrical power involved, which means one person has power, agency, and experiences privilege, and the other person doesn't. And when you're talking about political parties or political affiliations, somebody in a political party has a huge group of other people who agree with them and will give them agency and will listen to them. But no, it's not. There are a lot of people. Melanie, you were saying before, people love the victim card, and this is one of them. People feel my politics get me in trouble. People don't like me because of my politics. No, they don't like you because you're a shitty person. That's why they don't like you if it's a political thing. Tell me about your experience with that, because that's you were mentioning about needing the victim card, and your experience with that. People needing to claim that they've been the victim of something. And that's kind of a problem. Talk to me about that a little bit, because this is a great question.
Absolutely. It was in reference to when we were talking about specific demographics that weren't able to be victimized by a hate crime. And that's when I said that everyone wants a victim card, it seems. And they will be very upset to hear if they fall into that demographic that they indeed cannot have that happen to them when they would like to sometimes fall back on something like that to be a victim, to gain attention, or to be, have people feel sorry for them.
Right, exactly. They want them to feel like they're the victim, like something has happened to them. If you have agency, if you have privilege, if you are in a certain strata of society, you do not have those kinds of problems. In fact, your ability to scream out loud and be heard actually demonstrates that what you're experiencing is not a hate crime. You can't go on national television and complain that people don't like you because of your political party and say that you're experiencing a hate crime of some kind. It's not the same thing. And this is the most important thing to understand. It's never about hate. Hate is the most extreme manifestation of a hate crime. The problem is the name. Politically, it gets people excited, it gets them fired up, it polarizes them. It's a great name for the legislation, but it does not accurately reflect what the crime is, because the crime is really about bias. It's about prejudice.
Right. And I think that people aren't aware. They aren't aware of what it actually means. So like you said, hate is the word that they're using, but people are throwing this term around and they have no idea what actually falls under it or what the description of said crime would be.
That's right. That's right. They have no clear, consistent idea of what the definition is. And this is not limited to lay people, law enforcement, judges, people who are responsible for investigating these crimes as part of units actually believe that they have a full and complete grasp of what a hate crime is, and they do not. Let me show you. I'm going to go here real quick. I'll share my screen real quick. Easy to read hate crime myths. That's not it. Stop. Real quick, I want to share this with everyone. Let's go to a window. We'll go to, that's this one, right? Facebook. We'll go to Facebook. All right, so hopefully we can see the screen here. So this is a actual guy from your area. Remember we were talking about this before. This is a guy who's actually, his name is, we'll go to, it's talking about all the anti-Muslim crimes that are occurring. And they did a interview, this news organization in Canada, with two different people. Sergeant Eric Boynton with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Unit. I have no idea what that is. I bet they do very little. I would imagine they do almost nothing. It'd be very exciting if they did something. I can imagine they do. It's all PR and being on TV and talking. Detective Constable Ernie Friesen with Criminal Intelligence, Gangs, and Hate Crime. So to combine gangs and hate crime into the same unit is about the dumbest thing you could possibly do. It basically is an acknowledgement that you don't understand what hate crimes are and you're not really interested in investigating them because you're going to have way more gang problems than you are going to have hate crimes or reported hate crimes. There are tons of hate crimes that happen every day that don't get reported because of this reason, because people don't trust law enforcement. Well, this is what the guy says. He says these crimes are motivated generally by bias or hate. Well, more bias than hate. Hate is really not usually going to be the motivation. It's going to be the rarest motivation on the extreme end. And to even mention this in a thing is they start, well, here we go. When we have evidence that suggests that the cause of a crime was a significant factor in being committed, then we start considering it to the hate elements. Okay, this is a problem. Because, why? Because there are no elements of hate. You have to examine the context, history, and behavior. There's a whole bunch of stuff you got to do. There aren't elements of hate in a hate crime. It's not quite how it works. And even if he were to look at his own statute, what he means is maybe the statutory requirements. And this gives you an insight into how this actually works. They're interested in the legal definition, but it's a definition they do not understand because they're not really investigating the crime. They're just seeing whether or not what's reported matches what they believe to be true. And the decision to investigate or proceed with the case and make it go further is political first. But primarily for the individual officer, it's about their personal understanding of what a hate crime is and their own biases and prejudices against the people who are actually reporting the crime. This is the biggest problem. The biggest impediment is the context of law enforcement, which makes people feel uneasy and unsafe in reporting. And you were talking about that a little bit, but the bottom line is law enforcement is the one that's responsible for investigating these things. And they clearly, again and again, have demonstrated that they don't understand what hate crimes are. More importantly, that they do not want to investigate them. Can you talk to us? You made a comment earlier today. We were talking about this podcast, and you made a comment about your own experiences with some of the behavior that's occurred relating to your own kids in school and the choices that you had to make, the tough choices, the context, and the tough choices. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm going to tell you right now, not everybody has that experience because not everyone shares your exact context. If someone like me, who is white, who is a male, and who has privilege, females who are white and have privilege, very often do not share the same contextual reality as someone who's in your position. Can you explain a little bit about that? I hate to call you
Sure.
out like it, but I know we talked about it. I think it's very
No,
important to share the story.
that's okay. I did mention it briefly. I have two young daughters that are of mixed race, and we live in a pretty small town in Ontario, and they go to a predominantly white public school. And I've had to deal with both. They're both in they're different grades, a year apart, and I've had to deal with this issue of children saying racist things towards them within the classroom. So this is happening, like I said, to both of them. And what happened is the principal will call and they will notify me of the situation and explain what happened. That usually both kids are down in the principal's office, and that's about the extent of that. I go in to pick up the child. They're more concerned about if I'm upset than what's going on and actually preventing it or doing anything about it. So as long as I was okay, then everything was done. There was no reporting of this. There was no the child that said, sorry, it's all coming back in my own head right now. Like I'm repeating in my own ear. So it's all coming back in my own head right now. Like recording into my own head.
Yeah. So, sorry.
I don't know what's going on.
What's going on? Is that better?
It is right now. It just started repeating itself, so all I could hear was what I was saying, and it was just kept going.
Weird audio problem.
What had
right?
happened was I was notified by the principal, and I went in and we had a discussion, a very short discussion. I asked what was going to be done, and they said they would deal with it. They would take care of it. What I didn't understand until you and I were speaking is that this should have been reported. This is something that should have gone to law enforcement right away. It shouldn't have been a discussion with me. I should be notified of it, and so should the other family. But this is something that should have been a law enforcement issue, but it's not. So going forward, like I said, it falls right into what we were talking about. So now I have the decision that I have to possibly move from where I'm living to find a school that might be more diverse or more accommodating to my children, because like you said, it's like they don't fit in here. They don't want, we have to move out of here. And it was technically what we're talking about.
So this is really important, and I want to make this very clear. We talked about this. It's so important to understand. Again, the issue is there is a small vocal minority in any group of people who is upset by the existence of people who are of vulnerable classes and vulnerable populations to make themselves feel stronger out of their own fear of their own weakness, their own pathetic existence. They need to attack other people to make themselves feel special. This is very normal. This is a very normal construct, but it's also very easily dispelled if the people in charge do not allow it. The people in charge of creating a space like a school are in charge of monitoring that space to make sure that there isn't prejudicial bias or hate speech, right, if you will. That's the first thing. So the responsibility is for the adults. But it's a vocal minority that has become the dominant voice because everyone's too concerned about calling them out and making them stop. That's how you get like an idiot president like Trump. People loved how full of hate he was and how misogynistic and how anti-immigrant he was. There's an entire segment of my country which loved this guy for being so hateful and so selfish, and also demonstrating his own fear and weakness and not really understanding what America is, or all the cultures that have come together to build it. But that's the point. The point is to make you feel like you don't belong. And this is so important to understand. Under the law, everyone belongs. Everyone belongs. And the only people who do not belong are the people who are speaking like that. The people who are talking that in that fashion to make other people feel uncomfortable, to make them leave. But here's the problem. Like you say, you have now a choice to make, because what's going to happen if you report this, it's going to piss everybody off, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you're going to get that reputation of the person who goes to the police or who reports crime. This is the problem, is that so many people of privilege want to claim being a victim, but they know they're really not. So they really can't call the police. But guess what we have? That's why we have in the United States this evolution into the Karens, the people who call the police for nothing. They call the police because they feel like they're under attack. No, what they don't like is someone who they are prejudiced against being in their space.
Mhm.
That's what it all comes down to. Black people in a public park, black people at a campground, black people on their porch, black people in their homes. They don't like them, and it transcends that to other, to immigrants and
Mhm.
people of different religions and that sort of thing. I am extremely concerned because what we have in the law enforcement sphere is this propaganda that they keep putting out. And that is this, like I got this from a law enforcement site today. Easy to read myths about hate crimes from law enforcement. And basically, what they say over and over again is always report it, right? The first myth, attacks happen too often. Report it. Okay, yeah, but that doesn't actually address the myth. Yeah, you got it. The answer to the myth is you need to actually report the crime, because if you don't report the crime, they don't get counted. So a lot of we have to acknowledge is there are a lot of these crimes. They're not reported to law enforcement, and it's because people don't trust law enforcement to respond professionally, appropriately, or within the law. They trust them to behave badly. And then if you don't think the police can do anything, report it anyway. But more important, I love this. This is my favorite one. This one down here, it says, let's see. Oh, police, the police, people will find out my information. No, report it. The police don't publish personal information. Yeah, they do all the time. Law enforcement get together in Facebook groups and other places, and they absolutely share this information with their spouses, their girlfriends, husbands, whoever will listen. They share it amongst themselves, and they share it with other people. So this is false. But my favorite one is this one right here. If you tell police, things will get worse. And the answer is from the police, you should not have to put up a hate crime. Yeah, obviously, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. But let's get more real, because let's talk. I really want to get to the hard truth on this issue. And I think you and I actually came to it during our pre-interview process, our pre-discussion process. And that is, I asked you, I was thinking about this. I was trying to take on the gender perspective, which means trying to understand that there are different approaches, different viewpoints, different ways to think about a problem. And I think about a problem as a male, as a white male. If I'm going to the police, doesn't matter what I look like, doesn't matter what I'm dressing, doesn't matter what I wear. I can just go in there looking like a bum, or I can go in there wearing my suit, wear my tie. Doesn't matter. I'm going to get treated pretty much the same if I'm a white male. But as a female, I was thinking to myself, do you have to get ready? Do you think to yourself, I need to dress a particular way in order to make a report to law enforcement? Tell me about that, because this conversation blows my mind. Talk to me about it.
Absolutely. But you asked me if I would have to think about what I look like if I was going to report something to a police officer. And the
Yep.
answer is 100% yes. I would be very cautious of what I'm wearing, how my hair is, all of these different things to report it to the police so I would be taken seriously. In my experience, that went the opposite direction based solely on my appearance at the time of a report. So this is something that women have to think about all the time. Are we going to be taken seriously, or is it going to be an invitation
And
for
men don't. And
flirting?
men do not think about
No, I don't think they need to.
it. So tell me why. Yeah, I cut you off. I apologize for that.
That's
And I
okay.
do it all the time. I apologize. Let me just let you follow up on that point, because what are you worried about? What are you worried is going to happen if you dress up, if you attend to yourself in a way that you normally would, potentially?
First, I I wouldn't be taken seriously. Again, this is also based on something that actually happened to me. It's a personal experience. So I wasn't taken seriously. I was hit on for the most part. They were saying things or making some sort of flirtatious comment when I'm trying to report a serious event that happened. And it was more so swept under the rug, I guess, or just kind of brushed off with because they thought that it was an invitation, the way that I was made up, as they would say, or done up, whatever the term is, that I was going in looking for attention and nothing actually happened.
Right. This is such a great way of putting it. One of the things we talk about in terms of human rights all the time and the gender perspective is that all people have the right to express themselves in whatever way they see
Mhm.
fit, as long as it's
Yep.
not hurting other people or taking away from the rights of others. Right. And by that, these acts of self-expression, the clothes that you wear, maybe you have tattoos, that your hairstyle, your jewelry, your earrings, your facial metal. These things are forms of personal expression that are forms of free speech. They're protected speech, essentially. But the problem is when it comes to females in particular, with men don't know how to interact with females other than sexually, other than in a sexual context. So everything is about, the first thing they're going to do is comment on how you look, comment on your hair. And they're going to make judgments about whether or not you deserve justice or attention based on how you look. The most profound example of this that I have in my career happened to me when I was very young. I was at the NYPD working on a sexual assault case with the co-author of my textbook on Rape Investigation Handbook and one of the co-authors on false allegations, Detective John Savino. We were sitting there and I was working, going over some paperwork, going over some files related to the case. And we were in the common room and the bullpen, as it were. And they brought in a woman who was, well, let's put it this way. She was Asian. And she had all the artifices of someone who they had their hair done very well. Their makeup was done to perfection. They were wearing very nice and well-fitting, well-organized clothing. You know, they looked good. They looked like they'd really put some time into their appearance. Every single detective in that place wanted to spend time with her. Like 5 guys came near her to take her report. They jumped off what they were doing to go listen to her, talk to her, smell her perfume, listen to her laugh, and take her report. All right. Now, I'm not judging her at all. She's a victim. She's reporting a crime. She was a prostitute who was reporting a sexual assault. But law enforcement's response to her was very positive, and they just wanted to spend time with her, and they were making some of the most inappropriate comments about how she looked, and that was very clear after they were giving out their cards with their personal cell phone numbers on them. I mean, it was appalling. Okay. So fast forward to another day, same context. I'm working there, and there's a black woman who comes in. She's overweight. She's wearing a very tight fitting skirt, wearing very audacious makeup, wearing a wig. And she is also a prostitute. And she is told to sit and wait. And she waited for 2 hours before a detective took her statement and was not interested really in that statement at all. And basically, he just kind of, at the end, he was just kind of like, look, I don't know what we're going to be able to do with this. And, you know, I'm sorry, but this happens. I mean, your profession, you got to expect this is going to happen, right? I mean, this is normal, right? I mean, I don't know. So, you know, we'll do our best, but there's no promises. And it's just like the difference between the two contexts was night and day.
Mm-hmm.
And this itself is essentially how males think. They fetishize females of different nationalities, different races. This is a really great question we talked about as well. What is the quickest way to demonstrate that you're not racist? We have a governor in Alaska who's like, I'm not racist at all. And the reason why I know I'm not racist is because I married a Native woman.
Mm-hmm. I hear that so often. People say things like that.
Tell me your response, and I'll tell you mine, because I just think this is such a fascinating. This is the hard truth. I know it's going to make some people upset, but it's really the hard truth, and it needs to be said out loud.
Well,
go ahead. Tell me your thoughts.
I've listened to people justify certain things as well by saying something similar. And to me, it just screams, well, no, I am exactly the opposite of what I'm going to tell you I am. And this is my justification for it.
Right. No, you're not wrong. So it is possible 2 people of different power dynamics, different social structures, different racial contexts meet on an equal playing field, and they get to know each other, and they hit it off, and they have a relationship. That's totally a possible thing. All right. Mm-hmm. And the way you know that's possible within the spectrum of a person's relationships is that they have relationships with different types of people. Okay. But if you have a person, specifically men, I'm talking about you men, who fetishize a particular type of person, like they're looking for someone who's Asian, they're looking for someone who's Black, they're looking for someone who's Latina, they're looking for someone of a particular ethnicity or a particular heritage, because 2 reasons. One, they believe they're better than that person, so ordering them around is actually natural. And 2, they only think of the person in a sexual subordinate context. And that is the problem. Men, especially in the United States, love meeting women in foreign countries, like, say, that people who are impoverished or people who are of different ethnicities, because they believe that ethnicity will make that person more subordinate, as a more less outspoken, less independent, and more of a housewife. That's the
like
fantasy of many men in the United States. Does that make sense, or I lost it?
Oh no, that makes sense, and it goes full circle back to control. They're easier to control in that aspect.
Yeah, it's about control. It's about controlling the physical space. So ask yourself in these contexts, what's the nature of the relationship? What's the history? Is this person someone who's been fetishized, or have they been selected because of their purported docile nature? Anybody who knows anything about Asian women understands that they're just as assertive and just as intelligent and just as independent as any others, but they know how to play a part sometimes. And and American men their egos are very fragile. Their egos are everything about them is very small, very, very small. They're so afraid of being challenged. They're so afraid of not getting respect, or whatever that means, because they're so egocentric that they need to find someone of a particular race or of a particular context that they can feel superior to. And that's
very
itself
similar here, not just the U.S.
Tell me why. Tell me your experience, because I'm going to tell you, to me, it's horrifying when I see it. And that's not every time, but I've seen so many guys, especially when I used to when I used to spend all my time in Alaska. I was all the time I saw guys who worked for in different contexts on the island, who could not handle an actual female from the island, somebody who's actually independent, outspoken, educated, knows how to do stuff, doesn't need a man. They couldn't handle that. What they wanted, they would import women from Asia or from Eastern Europe who they thought were economically disadvantaged and who they thought were culturally more docile, so that they could subordinate them. And you saw how they treated them in public. It was so awful, so awful. Tell me your experience with that, because I know that everything I've seen is terrible. It's not good.
I've had a personal experience with that too. I've had somebody say outright to me that I would be, I am wanted by a black male. Say, they were talking about black men in general. They said that you would be definitely desired by a black male because you will be, like, it was saying, more submissive, and you're not as loud or something, they said, or I wouldn't stand up to them. So they did tell me, and this came from a male, that they would rather date a white woman or an Asian woman because they feel that they are easier to deal with in a relationship. I've had that said to my face. So I see it all over the place.
Yeah. The relationship dynamics are complicated, but if you are fetishizing that person or choosing people based on their context, where you believe the power dynamic is imbalanced so that you can have control and control the space, that's the problem.
Right.
That is
and
itself
people don't understand
that is itself evidence of racism. What?
And people don't understand that. They don't know that something like that is racist in itself.
So when I hear the governor of Alaska saying, "I know I'm not racist because I married a Native woman," it's like, oh my God, it's just facepalm, because it's like, you're demonstrating the very colonizer behavior that, that's possible, that they met and that's true love and all this good stuff. And that's great. But the context itself is problematic. So to say as a blanket statement that this is proof of the absence of racism is simply not true. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't love his wife. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that by itself is not evidence of the absence of racism. In fact, it can be an indicator of it. It can be a big red flag. Right. So it's not true every time. It's not true in every case, but it's a red flag. Right? That's a very important concept. In particular, in the United States, we have a problem. We've talked about this before a little bit. We have a problem with the way we see our immigrants. We think immigrants are bad if they the darker the skin tone, the more bad the immigrant is for some reason, because there's this belief. I actually don't know what the belief is. I think it's just, to me, it's political nonsense. There's the constant perpetuation of stereotypes, the constant perpetuation of, darker skin equals mentally something more, and psychologically something more filthy. It's the notion of white beauty. In China, for example, white people, the way they describe white people, they call them in general the beautiful people. So for me, when I go to China, it's like, oh my God, he's American, he's blah 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 blah. It doesn't matter that I have this face and I'm this disfigured. In the States, I'm what, like a 4 or a 5, but in China, I'm like a 9. It's great. But the point is, they have a very specific view of different people and different cultures. And to pretend that that's not happening, to pretend that we aren't equating value with whiteness and haven't been doing this for generations, for hundreds of years, thousands of years, is absolute nonsense. And that's what I'm saying. That's a problem we have. In your country, the biggest group that's being attacked, I believe, is what I'm reading is Muslims. Tell me about that.
There have been 2 recent events that have caused a lot of people to open up their eyes and be aware of what's happening. There was an event in a shooting in a mosque in Quebec, and then there was a vehicle that drove into a family of 6, Muslim family in London, Ontario. And these things have been on the rise for quite some time, but everybody was ignoring it until these recent events. And even still, I can tell you that it's not being talked about or really anything happening with that. It kind of just fades off, unfortunately, again, like everything else. There was a movement to increase, what was it, like governing websites and social platforms and things like that for any sort of hate speech and things that will come on. They were wanting to govern that, take things down, because what I was reading in Canada is the belief is if we can get it offline, it's not going to happen outside of the online world, which I don't think that's the solution to the problem. But this has like these crimes have increased a lot, and a lot over the pandemic as well. There's been a large increase in these hate crimes over the pandemic.
Yeah, not just because of the proximity of people in tight quarters, but also because the removal of certain privileges makes people who have privilege angry, and they lash out. They lash out at other people when they're treated as equal with them. That's a big problem. When you have somebody who normally has privilege, who normally has a little more agency and a little more, velvet rope mentality, and the velvet rope is gone now, they get much angrier because they believe, they're entitled to special treatment and they don't want to be treated as equals. So the problem isn't that they're being treated as equals. The problem is they believe they should be treated better. And there's a big problem there. But I want to go back to what you said about the hate crimes. If you just move it offline. No, the problem is law enforcement does not investigate crime unless they have to. They investigate crime when there's a public outcry, right? When they address problems, when there is a public outcry. If things are happening in social media, they are totally undeniable. And you can copy, paste, quote, link. You can do whatever you need to document this event, and it is unequivocal. The behavior is unequivocal. So by trying to get it offline, what they're trying to do is reduce their own responsibility for investigating the crimes and make it appear as though they're achieving a result. What they're really doing is making people who are experiencing these crimes feel unsafe and unsupported. So yes, they are going to report less, but that will not change the number of hate crimes that occur. And I want to make another point here, which you kind of raised, and that is that, like you said, this solution will not solve the problem. Why? Hate crimes are a symptom. The bias, the prejudice, the assaults, the slurs, the threats, the murders, the killings, these are all symptoms of a greater problem. They're not the problem. They are the symptom. They're what law enforcement responds to. And law enforcement, I'm giving them a hard time in this podcast as usual, but let me just say this again. They are not social workers. They are not psychologists. And they need to stop acting and responding like they are. They need to stop speaking and answering questions that they're not qualified to answer them. Well, law enforcement has put itself in a position where they are actually responding to things they shouldn't be, where they are commenting, making social commentary on things they shouldn't be. When a news person or a person of authority asks somebody in law enforcement a question that is outside of the realm of law enforcement activities, like psychological motives, defining certain things, they should shut up. They should say, I don't understand. I don't know that. That's not my training. I don't have that. The problem is you put a microphone in front of a police officer or put them on a social media platform And suddenly they're an expert in everything. And it is absolutely humiliating for them when it gets pointed out again and again and again that they are ignorant, that they don't know the literature, they don't know the law, and they barely understand basic human relationships because their relationships are based on power asymmetry. This is why law enforcement has higher rates of suicide, depression, alcoholism, and domestic violence, something like 4 or 5 times higher than people outside of law enforcement, because their entire way of negotiating problems is with violence and force. So of course, they believe that they are competent and qualified to respond to questions. And if you don't like it, well, these are my cuffs and here's my gun. And that's what it comes down to very often. It's very, very disturbing. Once you start paying attention to how law enforcement speak to each other in private, or how they speak in their own private social media, or even how the stupid ones make comments publicly, it's horrifying. So what I'm trying to say is law enforcement has the responsibility to respond to the crime and investigate it properly, which they're not doing at all because they don't understand the crime. But this is on purpose because they're talking themselves out of it. They're talking themselves out of doing the investigation, out of making arrests, because they don't want to, because their desire is to not have to deal with the problem. This is because they actually don't really even understand what the problem is, because if they did, they would understand that their culture, law enforcement culture, is part of the problem. Like we've talked about before, law enforcement culture is based on masculinity. And this means that anything weak or that's feminine gets attacked. This is why it's homophobic. This is why there's a lot of violations against women. This is why the entire culture is part of the rape culture. It's a very big problem. And you can't be part of the problem and also part of the solution unless you first recognize what you're doing to contribute to it. And law enforcement doesn't do that. They speak with authority on all things and with impunity because they're not worried about actually getting in trouble for what they say or do. This requires actual training to understand the continuum of violence that's associated with hate crimes. And it requires the ability, the willingness to investigate crimes, even when there's no evidence of actual physical harm that's been caused. You have to actually investigate the context, talk to witnesses, talk to different people. This is not a thing. This is a thing that takes a little bit of time, like all investigations. But law enforcement doesn't like to do that. But I would say 80% of the law enforcement officers that I know do not want to do investigations, mainly because they don't know how. So what they're doing is they're faking it most of the time. The 20% that are doing it really well. And they're carrying the weight for everyone else because they're competent, they're professional, and they're knowledgeable. And they know the law. And they're constantly having to either bring their colleagues in line or apologize for them. It's very frustrating. You know some good cops, right? I mean, you've seen them. You know that there could be good ones all the time.
Yeah,
but
there are good ones. They, like I've said before, the good ones tend to have a harder time within the career because they are going against the majority.
That's right. That's right. So when we talk about crime, the problem is we have to talk about law enforcement and we have to talk about the sort of impotence of a law enforcement response to a social problem. Law enforcement is not capable or qualified of solving this problem. They can only respond to the symptoms, which are the hate crimes. The real problem is the way we talk about other people, the way we view other people, the way we don't see other people as human beings, the way we objectify different people, different classes, different citizens, different nationalities, and the way we feel comfortable expressing our prejudices these days. What I will say is Donald Trump did not invent racism, nor did he invent misogyny or any of the other terrible things that he participates in with his mouth and with his deeds, specifically on the border. My God, that was so horrible. What he did as the commander-in-chief was make it okay for the racists and the misogynists who work for him to start speaking out loud. And that exemplifies the Trump presidency. That's his legacy, is that he brought out all this racism, all these terrible people, very small minority, felt very comfortable talking openly about it. But the other people don't feel comfortable at all with it. They don't want the violence. They don't want the conflict. So they're standing down. And so it makes it look like the 10, 15% who are responsible for all this hate speech, that they're in the majority when they're not. And they wind up getting promoted into positions of authority or getting elected to public office. And it creates an even bigger disparity in the reality. Again, overrepresentation of these ideas. I have to hope. Unfortunately, in the United States, 50%, almost not quite, just a little bit less than 50% of the people support Trump still, even despite his racist beliefs and attitudes. And this continues to give license to this kind of hate speech. This continues to give license to these false narratives about immigrants and false narratives about, and also the opposite, the essentially objectifying women. Like women are only good if they're pretty and quiet, right?
Yes, but they should smile more.
Oh yeah, that was one of the things that we were talking about, the law enforcement response to a victim of sexual assault. Well, you'd be prettier if you smiled more. I've actually heard cops say that to victims in my career. It blows me away. Or not victims of rape that I recall, but a victim of domestic violence. I'm recalling a specific incident. A victim of domestic violence because the cop was trying to come on to the lady. The cop was interested in dating this person. So they were like, "Oh, you're so pretty. You'd be much prettier if you smiled." And blah blah blah. Like he was trying to comfort her, and that was his way. His way of comforting her was actually hitting on her, as though that's what she needed at that moment.
I had a similar experience while reporting a sexual assault against an officer. And the officer, I had about 4 or 5 different male officers come in one at a time and do the interview with me. And then it was the same sort of thing. It was that they wanted to know if I was there for attention. And if I wanted attention the night that it happened, what was I doing? What was I wearing? What did I do to provoke this? And then in the same breath say they can't do anything about it, but they would love to take me out. So
this gets back to what we just talked about 15 minutes ago. We were talking about, do you consider what you wear before you go in to report a crime to law enforcement? And the answer is yes. But it's because the way you dress is considered the way you dress, the way you present yourself, if it's expressive, that is considered by men to be an invitation for attention. They believe that. And other women believe it too. That's the problem. Even if it's not, even if it's just, here's the thing. Self-expression is totally fine. It is totally acceptable in all forms. But there's a context. When you are someone reporting a crime, it shouldn't matter what you're wearing. It shouldn't be about you, per se. It should be specifically about the crime that you're reporting and the elements of that crime and whether or not they can be established through an investigation. That's pretty basic. Instead, law enforcement is generally incapable of seeing the crime without first having to look through the lens of the victim in terms of their behavior and their essentially their expressions, their personal expressions of self, and very judgmental. And this is the problem, because it's not the reality is not everything that every female is doing is an invitation for men to make comments or to touch them. Like you were saying, one of the things that blows me away is how many women have reported to me over the years, have told me over the years, my daughters, my friends, my colleagues. I've watched it happen in a club one time where men feel free to just walk up and touch them, grab their breasts or touch their hair or touch their ass, especially in like restaurants. I used to run a restaurant, and the servers were constantly getting harassed by every kind of man, every kind. And that really, I had no idea that was what was going on. I was very, I want to say naive. I just want to say I never had those contexts before. It wasn't something that I thought was okay. I was always taught that was never okay. You don't touch other people with permission, and you certainly don't touch them in their sexualized areas. All right, no matter what they're wearing or doing, that's never okay. But what blows me away is how many men think this is actually okay. If we don't think you have a problem with sort of racism, misogyny, and gender violence, which is another kind of hate crime, all you have to do is spend about 20 minutes in a restaurant. You'll watch how men treat the female servers. Yep. The other thing is men get angry if they don't get a female server. They want a female server because they want someone who is subordinate to them in a gender perspective, but also that they can feel free to touch and make really inappropriate comments to, like, the most disgusting things. Men are just, I can't believe it. Blows me away.
I've heard it all. I have heard it all.
Yeah, educate us, because there are people who are listening who do not have your experience, and do not understand that other men do this all the time. There are good guys out there who don't behave this way and don't know that other men behave this way all the time. Talk to us about that.
Uh, well, my own experience throughout the entirety of my adult life, even before that, actually, has been comments. No matter where, it doesn't matter. Listen, there's not a time and a place for something like this, but these things happen everywhere. I've been touched at a grocery store before and just thought that he could smack my ass and walk away. I didn't know this person. I get comments everywhere still to this day. It could be at the school with other parents. People, men specifically, think that they can say something jokingly and it will be sexual and that they can just get away with it. And it's okay because, and you know, you mentioned the Trump administration and how that kind of brought everything out to be okay, right? We heard him say that more than one occasion. And I heard that regurgitated out of the mouth of men everywhere. Well, Trump can do it. Okay, well, is that really what we're falling back on now? It's not okay, and you're committing a crime. But these things are happening every day, everywhere. And like I said to you in our conversation before this, it would just be easier if I stay home and I just don't put myself out there, because then the men can go around and do what they want and I'm safe, right? I'll be safe in my home away from them. But I'm supposed to be the one to take myself out of society so that you can behave in the way you want.
This is super important because this whole narrative puts the responsibility of changing behavior onto the vulnerable populations. Right. You're responsible for reporting the crime. You're responsible for changing your behavior if you want to share the space in a way that you feel safe. Right. Instead of it being the responsibility of the aggressor, of the person who's behaving in a violent fashion. By the way, there are different kinds of violence. There are, like I said, the threats, the slurs, so verbal violence, economic violence, physical violence. There are many different kinds of violence. And men feel okay doing that. They feel much safer now with having had Trump as a president, behaving this way. Because he's the role model for a lot of guys. He basically married a porn star. And that's the fantasy of a lot of guys who are very immature and don't know how to handle actual women, don't know how to handle real, by actual women, I mean real people, someone who's a real person. We're going to wrap up here. We're going to start wrapping up. But what I wanted to ask you is this. This is a very important question. Do you feel safe reporting crimes to law enforcement from your context in this fashion?
No, never. No.
Tell us why. Tell us why again. Summarize it for us quickly. This is so important.
Because I am made out to be the one who did something wrong. And I am then re-victimized throughout the investigation of something that had already happened to me. I don't feel safe with law enforcement taking me seriously, and I feel that they would continue to judge me based on my appearance and things like that, and it's just not a safe environment. So unfortunately, if something was to happen again, I probably would hesitate in reporting it at all, and that is a huge problem that we're seeing everywhere with vulnerable demographics. They're just scared to go to the people we're supposed to report it to. So what do we do? Where do we go from there?
So they not only don't understand the crime and they're not interested in doing the investigation, but if you're a female, they're going to be more likely to spend time commenting on what you're dressed in, how you're presenting yourself, and maybe hitting on you if the mood strikes them. So you have to go through this gauntlet of cops to find a good one that will hopefully help you with protecting your kids from this kind of stuff. Right. And that's when and you're not even talking about you, you're talking about your kids, which are more important than you. And you have to make these judgments about whether or not you're going to ask for help. I want to close by saying that it's super important to understand that the word victim has been co-opted to make it to translate into weak. If you're a victim, you're weak and potentially deserving of what happened to you. And that, by the way, is 100% the responsibility of law enforcement. They have created that narrative. Because why? Because law enforcement culture hates femininity and it hates weakness and it attacks it. This is not Brent Turvey's opinion. This is the scientific literature on law enforcement culture has described this so many different times in so many different ways. It's why they're homophobic. It's why they're anti-female. It's why they're misogynistic. It's why there's so many lawsuits related to gender-related hate crimes. It's a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
That narrative is the first thing that has to change. Someone attacks you and victimizes you, it doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you were there. It just means you were present. And the only way for things to stop is for there to be a zero tolerance for that sort of violent activity, that sort of violent behavior, whether it's words, threats, destruction of property, or stalking, or an attack on you physically, or even murder. So to me, that's the narrative that has to change. Talk to me a little bit about that, because that's that kind of victimization, identification with the victim sort of stereotype that we have in our head, that's weak and doesn't know what to do and needs help, as though that's what every victim is like. No, that's not right. Tell us, just talk a little bit about that, because I think it's too important.
Yeah, that's not exactly right on every occasion. The word victim can mean just somebody who had something happen to them, right? It doesn't mean they're weak. It doesn't mean that they asked for it or anything like that. It's usually the fact that, like you said, they were there. Just in my situation, I was there, and this happened to me. I was victimized in that situation. It doesn't mean I am weak or that I should be looked down upon. It's I don't, like you said, the term it's warped into something that it's not. And then people are scared to look weak. So they don't want to report something because they don't want to be labeled weak in society or with their peers either, because victims
with their family. Let's
exactly.
be honest, the hard truth. Let's talk about the families. Families are extremely judgmental when it comes to people who have been victimized, not just because it's a sign that their family is weak, that they're, oh my God, my family got victimized, I'm weak. Holy crap, that can't be the case. You must have done something to make that happen, because your weakness, your victimization reflects poorly on me. They make it all that's me, I has nothing to do with the person who got hurt. The very first response, and Ray Leo is actually the best person at this. I am such a bad person because I'm very logistical, and I try to do what's necessary. I think like a father trying to solve a mess in the back of the car, rather than dealing with a human being. Ray Leo is so much better than me. So like something bad will happen. I'll tell him like, man, you're not going to believe what just happened to me, XYZ. And he'll go, oh man, are you okay? I'm really sorry that happened. Are you okay? And I'm like, shit, I've been, my parents were mean to me when I was growing up. Why am I, holy shit. No one ever talked to me like that when I was growing up. My parents did an okay job. They didn't do great, but they did okay. And because I'm alive and I'm doing well. But the point is, I have very few people in my life who will check in on me like that when I tell them something. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
It's like being hit by a truck when it happens. I hope you have something like that in your life, because I am terrible at it. And Aurelio is so good. I mean, you got Aurelio too, I guess, if you want to tell him. But
I'll tell Aurelio. Definitely not you.
He definitely not, because he's so good at it. He makes you feel so much at ease and so much like it's going to be okay. And he'll be like, okay, we have to make sure that they're protected. We have to make sure their vulnerability is recognized, and we have to stop the damage from getting worse.
Right.
And that to me is the great point of this podcast today, is to, one, make people feel like it's okay to report these crimes. But two, if you're going to do it, the hard truth is you got to educate yourself on what the statute is, because law enforcement won't know it. Even the guys in the hate crimes unit, they're deeply ignorant of what hate crimes are and what the requirements are to meet it. Okay, so you got to educate yourself about the statute. But the other thing is, we got to change the way we talk about things. We got to stop using hate speech. We got to stop making little clever jokes that we think are funny that are racist. That's got to go. And we got to stop making victims feel like they're responsible for the terrible things that happen to them, so that we don't have to respond to them. Because it's really just about our own selfish discomfort when we're doing that. Exactly. Recognizing that we're uncomfortable with their victimization and the harm that they've suffered, and our potential culpability for not doing anything. So then we minimize it and we attack them.
Absolutely.
What do you tell me? Talk to me about that a little bit before we close, because I think this is such an important issue.
Yeah, just when you said that, you'll have people in something happens, and then you will have someone reach out, say a family member or a friend, and they're like, what happened? Are you okay? And they open up the conversation.
Yep.
You start telling them what happened, they get uncomfortable, and
Right.
it happens in a split second. Well, what did you do? Well, why didn't you leave that area? Why didn't you do this? Why wouldn't you have done it this way?
What were you doing there?
Exactly. And not at all to just support you and listen and just be there for you. Then it suddenly becomes an attack on what you did wrong. So you must have deserved that. Like
Yep. So
you were
law enforcement
asking
has an
for
obligation to never do that, right? Law enforcement's
it.
obligation is never to try to do anything other than listen,
Mhm,
document, and investigate, right? Their job is not to second guess or judge. Now, the problem is prosecutors. Prosecutors have taught law enforcement officers that they need to challenge them on certain things because, let's be honest, law enforcement's very terrible at conducting criminal investigations and documenting what they've done. So very often they wind up presenting a case to a prosecutor that cannot be supported. So the
mhm,
prosecutor, rather than teach them how to do an investigation, the prosecutor says, nope, you don't have it. You don't have this. You don't have that. But these guys don't know how to investigate crime. So they take the denial or the refutation by the prosecutor as evidence that it can't be done.
mhm,
When really what it means is, no, it can be done. You just don't know how. It's a very important lesson. I love this conversation so much because my goal is to be a better person. And I have in my life not always been a good person. I have had to learn a lot of lessons that most of which I've not fully learned yet, and I'm still learning. But part of my learning has to be these kinds of conversations with people who share different space and different reality from me, like you and like other colleagues and friends who, again, are much different, have a much different context than me. So I really appreciate it because I'm not, how do I put this? I'm not as good as I could be. And that's part of the problem is thinking that everything's okay. If it doesn't affect you and you're fine, no, it's not really about me. And there's a large
mhm,
segment of people who are like me who believe that because they don't experience hate crimes, because they're white and they have privilege and they have access and they have some agency, that they don't need to pay attention to this problem because it's not about them. It's 100% about you. If you're the person of privilege with agency who law enforcement is happy to protect and jump up and down for, it's definitely it's definitely about you because the reality is it's about controlling space. There are people who look just like me, who talk in very racist and biased and prejudiced manners that are interested in controlling the space of other people who are vulnerable, controlling their access to space or to basic services or basic human rights. And the more quiet I am about that, the more it appears like I'm okay with it. I'm giving consent for it. And I don't want to do that anymore. That's one of the reasons why I want to do more human rights related work. I enjoy doing that kind of work because I don't want to participate in that terrible, terrible denial of the crimes that are being committed because it doesn't hurt me.
mhm.
Because ultimately it does hurt me, just not in ways that are obvious. Talk to me about that for your own perspective, your own journey as we go.
I agree with what you were saying. I just said this recently, actually. If it's not directly affecting me, it doesn't exist. That's the mindset I see a lot within people, and especially around this topic. And
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be working in the human rights perspective portion of this. I know it's going to be a battle and it's going to take time and a lot needs to change, but I just want to be part of that. And I want to help make those changes, no matter how long it takes or how loud I have to speak. I'll tell my story thousands of times. I don't care.
Yeah.
Let's make some changes.
Well, I really appreciate it because not everyone has the ability to tell that story, to tell their story because of their context or their own, social anxiety. It's very helpful for me, for people like me, but also it's very helpful for people who are in your same situation who understand that what they need to do or can do in order to prepare if they need to make a complaint. Let's close by saying again, one, the law has to be understood. The laws are not terrible, but they need to be understood, right?
Mhm,
Two, if you're going to report, make sure that you know the law because you're going to have to explain it. And three, it's about protecting yourself and your space and your family from the minority of people who are vocal and violent in different ways. So, not reporting it is a choice. And not everybody has the ability to report. Not everybody feels safe reporting. So that means law enforcement has an obligation to create safe spaces for people to report. And that means law enforcement has to develop a zero tolerance for abuse by officers against people who are reporting, like women, minorities, people who suffer from poverty, people of different racial backgrounds. Law enforcement is primarily a bunch of white guys. Unfortunately, it's a bunch of, especially in Canada, it's a bunch of white guys policing a bunch of behavior that's committed by other people. And what we constantly are seeing is their ignorance of racial issues, their ignorance of their own context in the power structure, in the power dynamic. And that results in them feeling like it's okay for them to be either dismissive or to be openly hostile and physically, or excuse me, verbally or sexually aggressive with the people that come into their realm. That's what those are just some of the basic things that got to change. And hate crimes are a symptom of that. The unwillingness to investigate or prosecute hate crimes is a symptom of that. So we can and we must do better. We can do better, and we will do better. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about this today, because it's too important. It's much too important. I know we're going over a little bit, but I think it's too important. Any final words you'd like to say before we close out? Yeah.
I know we covered everything.
Well, we didn't cover everything, but we covered a lot of the stuff.
We covered a lot of the stuff we wanted to cover today. How's that?
I did. Well, the thing is, it's not a class. This is a conversation about the journey that we're taking and the impact that we want to have and the damage that we're seeing and some of the solutions that we've applied that we think might actually work. So on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you are interested, you can join us on Spotify. These are posted every week. So thank you very much. And everyone have a good week. We will see you again in 2 weeks. We are back on schedule. All right. Thank you very much.